I heard the jackhammer before I even opened my front door. Not the birds. Not the sprinklers. Just the sharp, mechanical crack, crack, crack of concrete being torn apart. And when I stepped outside in my robe, coffee half spilled on my shirt, I saw the HOA president standing in the middle of my driveway, arms crossed, wearing heels, and smirking like she'd just won a war. The driveway I built myself, the one that had passed inspection, the one that had my name stamped under it, because I wrote the safety regulations for this entire county. I stood there stunned for a second, watching two workers chip away at the smooth slab I'd poured less than 2 years ago. Dust floated in the morning air. A section of my retaining wall had already been pulled loose. My truck, still parked halfway up the driveway, was now boxed in with rubble. And then I saw her. Karen Chambers, HOA, president for Westbridge Hills. Former realtor. Current nightmare. She turned to me with that same overly sweet voice she used in board meetings and passive-aggressive newsletters. "Good morning, Mr. Langston. You must have received the citation we sent last week. Driveway gradient noncompliance, Section 14.2 of the HOA Codebook. We had to take action." I blinked. "What citation?" She smiled wider. "Certified mail. Should be in your inbox. But don't worry, we're remedying the issue now." "By demolishing my driveway?" She tilted her head like I was the crazy one. "It's a liability, sir. It doesn't meet HOA standards. Could cause runoff into neighboring lots." My jaw tightened. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't need to. Because what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that this driveway had already passed state inspection. By me. My name is Andrew Langston, Chief Building Inspector for Westbridge County. Every sidewalk, school, and storm drain in this town goes through my office. And that driveway? It was poured to exact slope standards. It was documented, sealed, and double certified. I had photos, permits, soil test results. And now? I had an HOA president standing in the middle of a civil engineering nightmare of her own making, with her clipboard, her red lipstick, and her unauthorized demolition team. She'd just made the biggest mistake of her HOA career. But this story doesn't start with a jackhammer. It started weeks earlier, with a letter. One that never made it into my hands. One she claimed she sent. And that right there was her first crack in the foundation. The trouble began when Karen hosted one of her community safety reviews, a fancy term for walking around with a measuring tape and photographing garden gnomes she didn't like. I'd seen her snapping photos in front of my house the week prior, pointing at my driveway, whispering to her assistant, a nervous guy with a clipboard too big for his hands. I'd thought nothing of it. Honestly, I figured she was bored. But 3 days later, a neighbor mentioned I was on the violation watch list. For what? They didn't know. But my name had come up at the last HOA meeting, and that's when I knew I needed to pay attention. Karen had fined the Wilsons for installing solar panels. The Rodriguezes got cited for a patio umbrella that was non-uniform. And poor Mrs. Kim down the street? She got a $200 penalty for leaving a recycling bin visible for 23 minutes past pickup. It was all minor, until it wasn't. When I emailed the HOA to ask about my property's status, I got no response. Not a, "we'll look into it." Not even an auto reply. And now, here she was, on my property, tearing up a legally compliant structure without notice, without permit, and without a clue who she was dealing with. Karen turned to the workers. "Make sure the slope is even when you re-pour. We'll go with the HOA's approved texture." I stepped closer, my voice calm but clear. "You're making a very expensive mistake." She smiled, teeth gleaming. "It's already been authorized by the board." "Really?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "Because unless you obtained a city demolition permit, you just violated 4 separate municipal codes, not to mention trespassing. And I hope those contractors are licensed, because if they're not..." The two workers froze. One of them lowered his jackhammer. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Sir, if you continue to threaten our team..." "I'm not threatening anyone," I said. "I'm informing you. As of today, this property is under official review by the Westbridge County Inspection Authority. And yes, I'm the one who signs the review orders." Silence. For a moment, I thought I saw her lips twitch, a tiny flicker of doubt. Then she recovered. "You can't intimidate me with your little job title," she snapped. "I'm not trying to," I replied, taking a slow step forward. "I'm just here to make sure the law gets followed, something you seem to struggle with." I turned to the workers. "Gentlemen, unless you want to be cited, I suggest you leave now. This work order is invalid." The taller of the two men wiped his brow and stepped back. "You got it, boss. Sorry, we were told this was approved." "It wasn't," Karen sputtered. "You'll regret this, Mr. Langston." I raised an eyebrow. "Not as much as you will, Mrs. Chambers, because this wasn't over. This was just the foundation, and soon, the whole HOA structure she built on intimidation, fake citations, and selective enforcement, it was going to come crashing down, with her name all over it." The notice arrived that evening, hand-delivered, not mailed. Thick cream paper, black embossed letters, signed by the board. Karen's handwriting was unmistakable. "Notice of interim property investigation. You are hereby informed that the Westbridge Hills HOA will conduct a comprehensive compliance review of your residence over the next 72 hours. Refusal to cooperate may result in further disciplinary action." I almost laughed. This was how she fought back? A faux legal intimidation letter masquerading as a court order? But I wasn't surprised. Karen never backed down. She escalated. The woman built her entire reign on paperwork and passive aggression. Her power didn't come from actual authority. It came from silence. From neighbors who didn't know the rules well enough to challenge her. But I did. And that's what terrified her. I set the letter down and turned to my desk, where 3 manila folders sat waiting, each one marked with a different name. Rodriguez, Kim, Wilson. Each one filled with documents I'd quietly collected over the past month. You see, after Karen's surprise attack on my driveway, I decided it was time to get to work, not as a neighbor, but as an inspector. And what I found? It wasn't just incompetence, it was fraud. Let's start with the Rodriguez case. They'd been fined $400 for unauthorized modifications to exterior landscaping. The modification? A flower box installed on their porch, exactly 24 inches wide, painted to match the trim, and installed with HOA approval. The fine? Issued 3 months after the approval was granted. The worst part? Karen had billed them twice, once under HOA code, and again under a special community harmony clause that doesn't exist in the bylaws. Then there was the Wilsons. Karen had cited them for improper seasonal lighting. They'd wrapped a single strand of soft white bulbs around their porch railing for their daughter's birthday. Not only was it temporary, it was documented on the HOA calendar Karen herself managed. And yet, $125 fine. No warning. This wasn't enforcement. This was targeting. I knew I couldn't fix it alone. So, I made a call. To the county oversight board, then another. To a local attorney I'd worked with on municipal code revisions. And finally, one to my old colleague from the State Housing Commission. I didn't tell them everything. Not yet. But I gave them just enough. Just enough to open the door. The next morning, Karen made her move. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She showed up with a measuring tape, 3 new board members, and a clipboard stacked with what she claimed were open violations against my property. It was a performance. They stood at the edge of my lawn, 3 middle-aged HOA loyalists and their queen, measuring, muttering, scribbling like court stenographers. Karen even pulled out a laser level. She pointed at my gutter. "This downspout extends 3 inches too far from the structure." "That's intentional," I said, stepping onto the porch. "It's part of the stormwater management design. County approved." She didn't look up. "We follow HOA standards here, Mr. Langston." I nodded slowly. Interesting. Because last I checked, HOA standards don't override civil engineering codes. One of her loyalists, a man named Gerald, shifted uncomfortably. He was new, freshly appointed after the last board election where Karen ran unopposed. He whispered, "Karen, maybe we should—" She cut him off. "Take photos of the foundation cracks. Document the egress window alignment." I smiled. "Would you like me to get the original plans from the county building office? I can also call the city inspector if you're concerned." She narrowed her eyes. We're just doing our job. So am I. A pause. Then she pulled out a final sheet from her clipboard. You'll be receiving a citation for driveway obstruction. Your truck is parked at an unsafe incline. I walked slowly toward her, calm, controlled. Karen, I said, just loud enough for her team to hear, this is your second unpermitted inspection in 48 hours. You've now trespassed on private property, attempted to override municipal zoning regulations, and initiated unauthorized demolition. That's 3 separate code violations. If I file a report this afternoon, you'll be facing a county audit by tomorrow morning. Gerald dropped his clipboard. One of the other board members looked at Karen. Is that true? Karen turned to her team, suddenly realizing the walls were starting to close in. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because what I hadn't told them yet was what I'd found buried in the financial records. Months of HOA spending labeled as infrastructure upgrades, funneled into a fake contractor name. And who signed the checks? Karen Chambers. The HOA's golden queen was about to be dethroned. Not by a mob, not by anger, but by paperwork. The very weapon she used against us. Now, it was our turn. The first week after the vote felt like a fresh breeze had swept through Westwood Estates. Mailboxes that were once cloned in HOA-mandated beige were now repainted in soft pastels and deep forest greens. Children chalked colorful designs across sidewalks that had once been scrubbed clean by order. The fences were still straight, the lawns still trimmed. But something had shifted. People smiled again, lingered at each other's porches, laughed without looking over their shoulders. But not everyone was smiling. Valerie's blinds remained shut. Her once pristine lawn was now slightly overgrown, not enough to draw attention, but enough to say she'd stopped caring about the rules she once enforced like gospel. She hadn't attended a single community gathering. Not the town hall that finalized the new interim board. Not the pancake breakfast fundraiser. Not even the block-wide spring cleanup, where even the teenagers showed up with rakes and music blasting from portable speakers. Mr. Brooks had kept his promise to stay in the background, guiding from behind the scenes, letting others take the microphone. He didn't want a crown. He just wanted peace. So when the first anonymous letter arrived, it took him a moment to understand what it meant. It was a simple sheet of white paper, typed in bold black font. No signature, no return address. Just one sentence. You may control the votes, but some of us remember who belongs here, and who doesn't. Brooks stared at the paper for a long time before folding it and slipping it into the drawer beside his kitchen sink. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Maybe it was just someone blowing off steam. A sore loser. He'd wait and watch. But the next day, Denise called. They egged my house last night, she said, her voice tight. I thought it was kids, but then I found this. She sent him a picture of the same type note, this one taped to her door. Her name was scribbled across the bottom in red pen. A third call came later that week, from Mr. Gupta. Someone had dumped a bag of nails in his driveway. 2 flat tires, 3 notes. All the same font. All unsigned. That night, Brooks walked the perimeter of Westwood Estates. Not as the silent investor, not as the reformist, but as a man trying to protect what he helped rebuild. He passed homes filled with laughter, backyards glowing with fairy lights, neighbors playing cards in open garages. But the shadows felt different. Too still, too deliberate. And every so often he'd glance at Valerie's house. Dark, quiet, its windows like unblinking eyes. He didn't want to believe she was behind it. Didn't want to believe she'd stoop this low. But then came the fire. It started just before midnight. A low crackling hiss in the backyard of the community center. The same one Valerie once ruled like a queen, and which the new board had repurposed as a shared space for events, classes, and meetings. Brooks got the call at 12:07 a.m. By the time he arrived, half the back patio was gone. Charred beams collapsed into a heap, smoke still twisting into the sky. The fire department had acted fast. No injuries, no nearby homes damaged. But the message had been sent. Someone didn't want this version of Westwood Estates to survive. A fire marshal handed him the report before the sun came up. Accelerants were used, he said plainly. Gasoline. This wasn't an accident. Brooks didn't speak. He just nodded. But inside, something had snapped. Later that morning, the board gathered at his house. Denise, Mr. Gupta, Sarah Green, and 2 new residents who'd been voted in after the reforms, people he trusted. They spread out the evidence, photos of the notes, screenshots of suspicious messages on the old HOA's community app, strange withdrawals that predated the board audit. "This is retaliation," Sarah said, "and not just from one person. Someone's helping her." "Multiple someones," Mr. Gupta added. "She's building something," Denise said. "A shadow board, a power structure, underground, off the books." Brooks didn't speak for a while. He just stared at the community center flyer taped to his fridge. "Westwood belongs to all of us." And thought about the fire, the fear creeping back into the neighborhood like smoke through old vents. Then he stood. "We're not going to fight them with fines or bylaws," he said. "We do what they never could." "Which is?" He looked each of them in the eye. "We tell the truth, loudly." The plan took shape fast. Not just press coverage, but a community forum. Open, recorded, and public. Not about revenge, but transparency. A complete digital archive of what the HOA had been, what it had become, and who had resisted change at every turn. Brooks knew the risk. He'd seen what retaliation looked like. But he also knew the truth scared people like Valerie more than any vote ever could. She had ruled with secrets. He would fight with light, and he wouldn't be alone. Because this time, Westwood wasn't afraid. The Westwood Community Forum was scheduled for a Thursday evening, just past sundown. Flyers had been hand-delivered to every house, posters hung in windows, stapled to light posts. The event was simple in design but explosive in intent. An open-air gathering where residents could share their experiences, uncensored, unmoderated, and on record. By 6:45 p.m., the park across from the old community center was filled with folding chairs, a projection screen, and 2 mounted cameras. Brooks had asked a local university student to livestream the event. "Let the world see what happens when a neighborhood reclaims its voice," he'd said. But as the crowd gathered and neighbors exchanged nervous greetings, tension hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Some people had brought blankets. Others clutched cups of coffee. A few, mostly Valerie's old allies, stood near the edge, arms crossed, eyes scanning every detail like it was all some kind of trap. Brooks took the stage at 7:05 p.m. "I never thought I'd be here," he began, voice steady but tight. "5 months ago, I didn't even live here full-time. I just wanted to restore some balance. Fix a few things quietly. But it's clear now that silence is part of what let things get so broken." He paused, letting the murmurs fade. "So tonight, we speak. Not with anger, not with fear, but with truth." Denise came up next, reading 3 violation letters she'd received for planting butterfly-attracting flowers instead of HOA-approved shrubs. Each letter had her name misspelled. Mr. Gupta followed, recounting the time he was fined for painting his porch light the wrong shade of white. He held up the light bulb like a courtroom exhibit, drawing a ripple of laughter. Then came Sarah Green. Quiet, soft-spoken, she told how she'd once offered to join the board and been laughed out of the room. "They said I didn't have the right image," she said. "I didn't know image meant obedience." The air shifted. It was working. People raised their hands. One by one they stepped forward. Single mothers, veterans, elderly couples, each sharing the same pattern. Pettiness wrapped in official language, isolation enforced by selective enforcement, kindness mistaken for weakness. Brooks watched from the side, pride and fury braided in his chest. And then, without warning, Valerie arrived. She stepped out of a black SUV with tinted windows, dressed not in workout gear, but in a sharp navy pantsuit. Her lips pressed thin, her gaze unwavering. She didn't walk. She glided. Her heels didn't click. They struck. For a moment, the microphone went quiet. Someone whispered, "She came." Brooks stepped forward calmly and handed her the mic. She didn't hesitate. "This is a smear campaign," she said coolly, "built on half-truths and emotional manipulation. I served this community for over a decade. I enforced the rules we all agreed to. The same rules that protected your property values and your safety. A few people clapped, not many. You call this transparency? She went on. I call it mob justice, and I won't let the legacy of Westwood be destroyed by emotional theatrics and social media hysteria. Brooks stepped forward again, voice steady. Then stay. Hear the rest. Defend your legacy. But Valerie shook her head, her eyes narrowing. You think you've won, but I built this neighborhood. I know where the weak spots are. She dropped the mic, literally, and walked back to her SUV without another word. The silence she left behind wasn't victory. It was a warning. Later that night, after the forum ended and most neighbors had returned home, Brooks lingered behind with Denise and Mr. Gupta. They helped stack chairs in the dark, the only light coming from the screen still playing replay footage from earlier speakers. We hit a nerve, Denise said quietly. We always were going to, Gupta replied. Brooks nodded, but said nothing. The footage from the cameras had been uploaded already. The comments section beneath the stream was exploding. Thousands of viewers chiming in, some outraged, some inspired, some vowing to attend their own HOA meetings for the first time. But Brooks's eyes were fixed on something else. A text on his phone. It had no name. Just a number. One he didn't recognize. Watch your step. Valerie wasn't alone. His jaw tightened. The forum had revealed something critical. Valerie didn't just represent the past. She was planning something. And she had help. What Brooks didn't know yet, what none of them could have known, was that deep inside a storage unit on the other side of town, boxes were being pulled out. Boxes filled with HOA records that had never been filed publicly. Documents that showed years of unreported fees, illegal evictions, even forged signatures on bylaw amendments. Valerie hadn't come to the forum to defend herself. She had come to measure her enemy. And now, the real war for Westwood was about to begin. The morning after the forum, Westwood didn't feel like the same neighborhood anymore. For the first time in years, Brooks noticed neighbors pausing to greet each other. Conversations that once stopped at awkward nods now stretched into shared frustrations, cautious laughs, even plans. Something had cracked open, and not even Valerie's dramatic exit could fully close it. But beneath the warmth was tension. Everyone felt it, like a second storm forming behind the first. Brooks stood in his kitchen, pouring coffee into a chipped mug, when the knock came. Sharp. Precise. He opened the door to find Denise, holding a thick folder and wearing an expression that meant trouble. You should see this, she said, stepping past him before being invited in. Inside the folder were photocopies. Dozens of them. Financial ledgers, violation records, board memos, all unsigned, all marked internal use only. Where did this come from? Brooks asked. Anonymous drop at the community mailbox, she replied. No return label, no note, just a sticky with your name on it. He flipped through the pages. Monthly dues reported as higher than what residents had actually paid. Landscaping budgets that quadrupled with no visible change. Multiple payments to companies that didn't exist on public registries. And buried near the back, photocopies of checks made out to Valoria Holdings LLC. Brooks stared at the name. That's Valerie's shell company, he whispered. She used it to buy foreclosed homes in other neighborhoods. And to collect HOA payments here, Denise said grimly. Illegally. A beat of silence passed between them. Do we go public with this? She asked. Brooks didn't answer immediately, because something in his gut told him this wasn't just a scandal. It was bait. That evening, under the pretense of a neighborhood cleanup project, Brooks met quietly with Mr. Gupta near the tennis courts, one of the few HOA-funded projects that had never actually been finished. They sat on an overturned bench, pretending to sort litter. I trust Denise, Brooks said, but this drop feels planted. Gupta nodded. A trap, you think? Or a warning. Valerie's too controlled to make mistakes. She wants us to react before we're ready. They agreed on a new plan. No announcements, No accusations. Just quiet investigation. If Valerie had skeletons in the closet, Brooks wanted to know exactly how many and where she kept the keys. That night, Denise emailed a contact at the county records office. Mr. Gupta reached out to a retired CPA he knew from his banking days. Brooks called his cousin, a software analyst with a knack for scraping public data from HOA websites. 3 days later, the first threads started to unravel. Valeria Holdings didn't just manage Westwood's reserve funds, it also controlled the emergency relief budget, money supposedly allocated for storm damage, medical hardship, and community projects. Except it had never been used for any of those things. Instead, the money had flowed steadily toward 3 consulting firms, all linked to Valerie's cousin, her son-in-law, and a former board member's real estate business. "It's a spider web," Denise muttered over their weekly kitchen table meeting. Layer after layer of deception. She covered her tracks, but not completely. Brooks rubbed his temples. "This is big enough to take her down permanently. But it's also big enough to draw fire," Mr. Gupta warned. "We expose this. We don't just threaten her reputation. We threaten her livelihood." That night, the retaliation began. First came the fines. Brooks found a fresh violation letter taped to his mailbox the next morning. Unkempt lawn. His grass had been cut 2 days ago. Denise got one too. Improper waste bin placement. Mr. Gupta? Obstructed curb line visibility. The handwriting wasn't Karen's nor Valerie's. It was typed, sterile, emotionless. But the message was clear. Later that evening, a series of HOA emails went out. From the Interim Compliance Committee, announcing new audits, stricter enforcement, and an emergency meeting to reassess leadership procedures. Brooks stared at the email, heart sinking. "She's not just fighting back," he murmured. "She's reclaiming control." He knew what this meant. Valerie was organizing, and she wasn't doing it alone. A vote followed, 86-3 in favor. Brooks, Denise, and Gupta were appointed as interim board leaders until a full election could be held. The crowd cheered, not out of celebration, but out of relief. For the first time in years, Westwood felt like it belonged to the people who lived there. Outside, under the soft flicker of street lamps, neighbors hugged, shared numbers, offered to help rebuild what had been broken, not just structurally, but emotionally. The next morning, Brooks walked past the notice board where Valerie's HOA newsletters had once been pinned in bold, controlling fonts. In its place, Denise had posted a hand-painted sign. "Welcome to Westwood, where neighbors make the rules." 2 weeks later, they held the first Westwood Together block party. Mr. Chen grilled ribs. The Patel kids ran through sprinklers. Sarah Jenkins set up a table for community ideas and future bylaws. Brooks sat in a folding chair, paper plate in hand, watching the sunset paint the houses golden. A young couple passed by with a baby stroller. The woman smiled. "We're the new owners at Lot 23. Heard what you did. Thank you." He smiled back. "I didn't do it alone." And, as laughter echoed through the street once haunted by silence, Brooks realized something deeper. Valerie hadn't just underestimated him. She had underestimated what a community could become when it chose courage over compliance. The real power in Westwood was never in the rules. It was always in the people. Not just the wind through the trees, but something quieter, deeper. A stillness that only comes after a long fight. For the first time in years, no one was peeking nervously through blinds or tiptoeing around flower beds in fear of citations. The lawns were still clean, the fences still neat, but the air held peace, not pressure. Brooks walked the neighborhood like a man seeing color for the first time. People waved now. Some even called him Mr. B, kids biking by with neon helmets and streamers on their handlebars. He didn't want fame. He wanted something much rarer, normalcy. And yet, normalcy, still, had its shadows. One of them arrived in a plain white envelope. No stamp. No name. Just tucked between his morning paper and the porch railing like a warning sealed in silence. Inside, a single sheet of printed paper. "Enjoy your victory. She's not done." He stared at it for a long time. then folded it in half and placed it inside the same drawer where he kept Valerie's original fake sale listing, the one that had started this all. Westwood had changed. But people like Valerie didn't vanish. They regrouped. They waited. They plotted. That afternoon, Brooks sat in his modest study, sunlight warming the edge of his desk. The new interim board had finished filing official documentation to the county clerk. A neighborhood survey on future HOA projects had just launched online, and Denise was in the next room with a local college intern, drafting up the bylaws for the community garden fund. But Brooks was focused on something else. The notebook. The one he had kept from day one. Every document. Every threat. Every name. He flipped to the final page and wrote just one sentence. Fear built a kingdom. But courage burned it down. He closed it, exhaled, and allowed himself one rare moment of stillness. Until the phone rang. It was Sarah Jenkins. "We just got something in the community inbox," she said, breathless. A list of names. People who were fined, evicted, or harassed, going back 8 years. Brooks sat upright. From where? No idea. No sender. But it's real. Every name, every address, even notes about why they were targeted. Brooks felt it then. The final thread. He knew what he had to do. That evening, they reconvened at the old community center, now reborn as the Westwood Resource Hub. It wasn't a courtroom. But it would do. The projector flickered to life. The list appeared. Dozens of names. Faces they knew. Stories they'd heard whispered, but never confirmed. Mrs. Patel, who left after her non-compliant awning, was removed without notice. Tom and Miguel, the couple who moved out after months of unexplained late fees. Mr. Levi, a veteran who was fined weekly for his flagpole's angle inconsistency. Each name, a chapter of the same story. Each face, another reason they fought back. Brooks stepped forward. "We can't fix what was done, but we can acknowledge it, and we can make sure it never happens again." And that's what they did. They voted to establish a restitution committee. Volunteer run. Donation supported. Dedicated to finding and compensating the victims of Valerie's abuse. Not just with money, but with apologies, recognition, and dignity. It didn't undo the past, but it honored it. 3 days later, a final letter arrived at Brooks's door. This one was signed. Valerie Eastman. It was handwritten. 4 lines. "You won the crowd, but the system is bigger than any neighborhood. I hope you're ready for what's next." Brooks folded the letter carefully and placed it next to his notebook. Then, without a second thought, he grabbed a match, stepped outside, and burned them both in the metal fire pit by his driveway. No more fear. No more shadows. The next week, Westwood hosted its first community-led town hall. Not to complain, but to celebrate. Neighbors brought food. Kids ran with chalk. A local band played acoustic covers under string lights. And Denise, who once hid behind HOA memos, stood tall at the mic and announced the full election date for the new permanent board. Gupta smiled, shaking hands with new residents. Sarah Jenkins handed out pamphlets about homeowner rights. And Brooks? He stood at the edge of the lawn, watching it all unfold. He didn't speak much that evening. But as Valerie's old house sat dark and empty behind him, a small boy tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Brooks?" "Yeah, kid? My mom says you saved our street." He smiled. "No, son. We saved each other." And in that quiet moment, under lights that weren't HOA approved, but brighter than any Westwood had seen before, the war finally ended. And a community was reborn.